Hello, we're Lilith and Lara here with Coffee, Cakes, and Castles, where we will be covering the 20,000 to 25,000 castles of Germany. We'll be talking about historical facts, myths, legends, and drama.
And today's episode is going to take us to Johannesburg, and I'm going to be excited to Johannesberg. Johannesburg, the German and English pronunciation again. And I'm excited for you guys to dive in with us.
Hello, I'm Lilith from America.
And I'm Lara from Germany, and we're just two girls who happen to love all things involving coffee, cakes, and castles, especially when you can have coffee and cake inside a castle. And today we're heading to Johannesberg. It's located in Hessen in the Rheingau wine region. If you will picture a palace rising on a hill surrounded by lush green vineyards.
Yes. And as always, we're simply two girls who love learning about Germany's castles. If you'd like to learn fascinating history without spending hours looking it up yourself, then this podcast is for you. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, guys. And if you'd like to visit Schloss Johannisberg, know that this one is mostly accessible via the wine estates in Rheingau. It has regular opening hours, wine tastings, a restaurant, and a panoramic view over the Rhine, which sounds so nice. You don't require tickets, you just pay per tasting, which is pretty cool. And cellar tours do require booking. So if you want to do a cellar tour, just keep in mind you have to book it before. And the restaurant accepts walk-ins, but definitely make a reservation if you plan to visit on the weekend, because the weekend is crazy. And the grounds are free to walk around. It's only 10 minutes from Rüdesheim am Rhein, which was one of Lila's favorites, which she visited, and about 55 minutes from Frankfurt. And this one of those cases where driving is the easiest way to get there.
Yes, and if you don't want to drive yourself, you can book a wine tour. And my husband and I actually had one booked, but we ended up having to change our plans. You can find tours that will take you to some of the best wineries in the region, or you can find one that will take you down the Rhine River to view all the castles while sipping on wine, which I am sad that we did get to go to Kloster Eberbach instead, but I am kind of sad that we missed out on the castles and wine.
Next time.
Yes, next time.
Our list is so long.
It is.
It's crazy.
I'll have to plan out the trip now, because otherwise it'll be too long to get to all of them.
So let's get into it. Should we start with a fun fact?
Let's do it.
For first fun fact, how long do you think wine has been produced here?
I'm guessing a long time, so I am going to go with 500 years.
A very long time, much longer than that. It's estimated that wine has been produced here for around 1,200 years.
That is way longer than I thought, and it's kind of mind-blowing. And that gives us a great starting point for this castle's history. Schloss Johannisberg's story begins long before the palace existed. In 772, lands in this area were donated to Fulda Abbey, establishing the earliest recorded monastic connection to the hill. Okay. By 817, there's a documented record of vineyards here and an exchange of land involving Louis the Pious. He specifically mentions the vineyard parcel along the Elsterbach stream. That's the first written evidence of wine production on Johannesburg slopes.
And we have to talk about the legend surrounding the vineyard.
Yes, and just keep in mind that this is a legend and not fact, but it's a good one because it involves the famed Charlemagne himself.
And we heard of that one a lot in our previous episodes, so...
Very famous.
Very famous. The story goes that Charlemagne was traveling along the Rhine when he noticed something strange. Snow still covered the northern side of the valley, but the hill of Johannesburg was already bare.
Meaning it was warmer and perfect for grapes.
Right. So according to the legend, Charlemagne ordered vines to be planted on that hill, and that's why Johannesburg became one of the earliest vineyards sites in the Rheingau.
And while it's a legend, the historical record backs up the idea that this hill was special. Johannesburg's vineyards are first documented in 817 under Louis the Pious, Charlemagne's son.
So even if Charlemagne didn't personally choose where to plant the vineyard, his dynasty definitely recognized Johannesburg as prime wine territory. But back to the facts. By 983, the vineyard already had a name. It was named Bischofsberg, meaning Bishop's Mountain.
And things really started to fully take shape in the late 11th to 12th century. Between 1096 and 1100, the Benedictines of Fulda founded a priory on the hill, the first Benedictine monastery in Rheingau. For a short time, Johannesburg even had a woman's hermitage nearby dedicated to St. George, so early on it briefly functioned almost like a double monastery.
And then comes the 12th century when everything expands. A large Romanesque basilica was built with a 3-nave pillar church with 9 bays and a transept. It had become, at this point, a monastic complex. And another fun detail, when do you think the name Johannesburg was given, that is?
Well, we're in the 12th century, so I assume sometime around then.
Yes, the name Johannesburg first appeared in 1130 when the monastery became independent and consecrated its altar to John the Baptist. That's where the name St. John's Hill comes from. So, yeah.
And as we mentioned earlier, there's even that medieval legend that Charlemagne noticed where snow had melted earlier in Johannesburg's slopes than on the surrounding hills. He supposedly said that's where the vine should go. And while not documented as fact, it shows how long people have associated this hill with wine.
Yes, which is quite funny. I think that's such a nice story. And by the 12th century, Johannesburg was already a well-established monastic center with vineyards and a Romanesque church, as we said before.
I have to mention this because this is where we ended up when we had to change plans. But Johannesburg oversaw a priory that would later become Aberbach Abbey, which is also worth a visit. It was amazing. And you get to learn how monks made wine. And as we know, good things typically don't last forever. By the 15th century, Johannesburg would face a decline, and in the 15th and 16th centuries, they would face armed conflict. There was the monastic reform movement of 1457, and we've mentioned this one before, the German Peasants War from 1524 to 1525.
And you might be asking what the monastic reform movement was, and we'll just give the short version here. The monastic reform movement of 1457 was part of the Melk reform. This was a Benedictine renewal emphasizing strict observance, communal discipline, theological study, and electoral revival. It centered at Melk and Tegernsee and was strongly influenced by Nicholas of Cusa. It reshaped monastic life in Austria and southern Germany during the mid-15th century.
And what was the stance of Johannesburg? By 1457, the Johannesburg community formally joined the Bergsfelde congregation, a major Benedictine reform movement focused on restoring strict observance, discipline, and communal order. This affiliation marked Johannesburg's entry into the broader monastic reform and sweeping German Benedictine houses.
As for the German Peasants' War, Johannesburg wasn't a battlefield the way that other areas such as Würzburg or the Tauber Valley were, but the monastery was still directly affected. In 1525, rebel groups moved to the Rhine Valley, targeting ecclesiastical estates, and Johannesburg, as a Benedictine landholder, was one of them. The monastery was attacked and damaged during the uprising.
Johannesburg's monastic community was already weakening by the early 1500s, and the violence and instability of the Peasants' War only helped to accelerate that decline. Even though Johannesburg wasn't a central stage of the revolt, the uprising still had a major impact.
Yeah, the monastery would continue until the last abbot died in 1563, after which it was dissolved.
and things get a little fuzzy here when it comes to the history. It's known for certain that at some point the monastery of Johannesburg ends up in ruins as it gets rebuilt in the 1700s, which we will get to along with some fun wine trivia. It's possible that it fell victim to Albert Alcibiades. He was a margrave of Brandenburg-Kulmbach and a member of the Franconian House of Hohenzollern, who launched a crusade of plunder all along Franconia and the Rhine. Several towns and monasteries were destroyed by him during this time. There was also the 30 Years' War, and what we do know is that in 1641, the abbey and its vineyard holdings were mortgaged.
On June 20th in 1716, construction began where the ruins of the monastery stood. We have Prince Abbot of Fulda to thank for this.
And this wasn't just a small renovation. The Prince Abbot purchased Johannesburg from the Schönbrunns after the monastery had been in ruins for decades, so it was quite an undertaking at this point.
Exactly. And in 1716, the Prince Abbot decided to transform the ruins into a summer residence. He cleared the remains of the old Benedictine monastery and began building the first version of the palace, the structure that would eventually become Schloss Johannisberg. He would demolish the ruins of the monastery, and with the help of Mainz architects Andrea Galassini and Johann Caspar Herwartel, a three-winged Baroque palace with a courtyard was constructed. The other pavilions and courtyard gate remain preserved to this day, which is quite nice to keep some stuff.
Yes, and he didn't just stop there. Under Fulda's ownership, Johannesburg's vineyards were recognized, the estate's wine production was revived, and the property finally emerged from the financial ruin caused by the 30 Years' War.
And here's the start of our wine trivia. What was the single grape that was planted at this time?
It was Riesling. In 1720, it became the first closed Riesling vineyard in the world, according to their website. And of course, they needed a place to house all that wine. In 1721, a 260-meter-long vaulted cellar was completed, and the vineyard was expanded to 18.9 hectares.
Is quite big.
It is big. Yes, and pretty amazing. Yeah,
and pretty impressive.
Yes, impressive. That's the word.
Yeah. And we have to talk about the somewhat dramatic invention of Spätlese category of wine, all thanks to a late career in 1775.
And this story really highlights how history turns on a tiny mistake.
Right? And on to our story. Since 1718, Johannesburg wasn't allowed to start the grape harvest until they received written permission from the Prince Bishop of Fulda. And that permission always arrived by a single horseback messenger called the Herbstkurier. And in English, it would be the Autumn Courier.
So everything depended on this one guy then.
Yes, and in 1775, the courier was late. 14 days late. Some say that he was even robbed on the way and lost the official harvest order, like I said, some drama. By the time he had finally arrived, the grapes had hung on the vines far too long. They have shriveled and many had developed noble rot.
Which everyone assumed meant that the harvest was ruined.
Completely. And the monks harvested it anyway, but no one expected anything good from those rotten grapes. And then, surprise, the wine was incredible. Rich, aromatic, sweet, and unlike anything they had ever produced.
So the delayed courier accidentally invented Spätlese?
Yes, and Johannesburg immediately began intentionally producing late harvest wines affected by noble rot. And that late courier became known as the Spätlese Reiter or the Spätlese Rider. They even erected a statue of him at the estate, which you can see today, which is so cool. Like, just this mistake, he got a statue.
It is. Could you imagine like the pressure on you and then you're 14 days late, you may have been robbed. But it ends with them building a statue of you.
And a lot of people loving you because you made the wine like 1,000 times better.
Yes. So it all worked out for this career. Here's a fun extra detail, and it ties into America. In 1778, Thomas Jefferson tasted a bottle of Johannesburg Spätlese. He was so impressed that he told his friends traveling to Europe to go to the Rheingau region and visit Johannesburg and bring a case back to America.
This is so cool. And it was all thanks to one delayed messenger.
Yes. And we've talked before about how there's so many ties to different areas and regions. And here we are getting a link to America. With the Spätlese. Next, with the political upheaval with the Napoleonic Wars, came several changing of hands for Johannesburg. It would pass to the House of Orange-Nassau, a very prominent royal Dutch family, and then to Marshal Kellerman, which was thanks to Napoleon himself. The estate would continue to change hands until 1816, when the Austrian Emperor Francis I would grant it to the Austrian Chancellor Clemens von Metternich, or Prince von Metternich.
Interesting fact here, it was granted so long as an annual payment of 1/10 of the yield from the vineyard accrued, so a tithe.
And this is not the first time we've heard of payment in wine.
Right.
Under Metternich, the estate's vineyards were reorganized and wine production was modernized. His family preserved the estate's wine legacy for generations.
And Johannesburg would transform from a Baroque palace to the neoclassical in 1826 thanks to Georg Möller. The main building would go from tall and grand to more horizontal, and the gardens would take on an English style.
We've talked about Johannesburg as a wine destination, and it's been so since the 19th century, where visitors could have wine on the terrace and view the gardens just as you can today.
So nice. I imagine us sitting there drinking some wine.
Yes, let's make this happen.
Yes. The Metternichs really shaped Johannesburg into the estate we recognize today, even though they primarily lived at their other residence in Vienna, in Bohemia, and at their diplomatic estates. Johannesburg was their cherished retreat. They spent a few weeks here each year, usually during the best part of the season when the wine really was glowing and the vineyards were at their most beautiful.
And when it came to succession, Johannesburg stayed in the Metternich family, but not through a daughter. The estate passed to Paul von Metternich, Clemens von Metternich's half-brother.
Why are we skipping the girls? That doesn't seem so fair.
Right? That was simply how inheritance laws worked at the time. Primogeniture and male succession were the norms. Still, the Metternichs, both the men and the women, were deeply involved in Johannesburg's development. They enjoyed being hands-on, especially with the vineyards.
And they had big ambitions. They wanted to make the best Riesling in all over Europe.
Yes, and they succeeded. By the 19th century, Johannesburg's wines were among the most expensive in the world. Some vintages sold for more than the top Bordeaux wines, which is saying something because Bordeaux was already the gold standard of European wine.
And the prize wasn't just prestige, it was earned. Johannesburg's wine won medals at major international exhibitions in Paris, Philadelphia, and Vienna. These weren't small regional fairs. They were the world stage competitions of the 19th century, where nations showed off their best art, industry, and agriculture.
Yes, very impressive. And Johannesburg wasn't just a pretty estate owned by a famous diplomat under the Metternichs. It became a global wine powerhouse.
And that legacy continued well into the 20th century, especially under Princess Tatiana von Metternich-Winneburg. And now we get to one of my favorite chapters, the era of Princess Tatiana von Metternich-Winneburg. If the earlier Metternichs shaped Johannesburg's reputation, Tatiana gave it a new life.
Absolutely. Tatiana arrived at Johannesburg in the mid-20th century when she married Prince Paul Alfons von Metternich-Winneburg, the last male heir of the Metternich line. By then, the estate had survived wars, political upheavals, and even a devastating fire in 1942. It needed someone with vision, and thankfully, Tatiana had plenty.
She was remarkable. A princess born in Russia, forced to flee and raised in exile, and educated in Paris, she brought this cosmopolitan energy to Johannesburg, turning it into a cultural living space.
One of her biggest contributions was helping to found the Rheingau Music Festival, which is now one of the most important classical music festivals in Europe, and it started at Johannesburg. Tatiana opened the estate's halls, courtyards, and gardens to music, orchestras, and audiences from around the world.
Imagine summer evenings in the Rheingau with the vineyards glowing gold, the Rhine shimmering below, and world-class musicians performing inside a palace. What's better?
Yes, it's wonderful what she was able to do. And she wasn't just a patron of the arts, she was also deeply involved in the estate's wine identity. Under her influence, Johannesburg continued to refine its Riesling productions, preserving the traditions established under the Metternichs while embracing modern winemaking techniques.
She became such a beloved figure in the Rheingau that people would talk of her with this mix of admiration and affection.
And we mentioned a fire in 1942, so we have to discuss it because it had a pretty big impact on Johannesburg. On February 12th, 1942, a massive fire broke out in the palace. It tore through the building so quickly that nothing could be saved. The entire historic library, centuries of documents, letters, maps, and monastic records were lost at this time.
And this wasn't just a few shelves of books. Johannesburg had accumulated manuscripts from its Benedictine era, estate records from the Prince Abbot of Fulda, and diplomatic papers from the Metternich family. The fire wiped out hundreds of years of written history in one single night.
And the cause was never fully clarified, but wartime conditions didn't help. Germany was deep in World War II, and resources were stretched thin, and the state couldn't rely on the kind of protection or maintenance that it would have in peacetime.
And the destruction was so complete that the palace had to be rebuilt almost from scratch after the war, and that task fell to the Metternich family, especially Prince Paul Alfons von Metternich-Winneburg and later Princess Tatiana.
Back to our current timeline, in 1974, Princess Tatiana and Prince Paul would share the estate with their partners, the Oetker family. And Lara, I bet you can name some of the things that they're famous for.
Yes, maybe the baking powder or the famous pizza. Nora, my sister, loves the pizza.
Oh, nice. And yes, it is the very same. And Prince Paul would die in 1992 with no heirs, and I find this a little sad. He left most of his fortune to his mistress rather than to Tatiana, who had done so much. And this left Tatiana to sell her remaining shares of Johannesburg to the Oetker family. She would reside on the estate until her death.
And this brings us to today, with Schloss Johannesburg being privately owned by the Oetker family. While you cannot tour the residence, you can tour the winery, as we said. The vineyard has grown to 35 hectares, which is 86 acres, with the Bibliotheca Subterranea, or the wine cellar, housing 25,000 bottles of Riesling.
So much wine. And the oldest bottle dates back to 1748.
Yes, and in 2024, the vineyard was listed as the 5th best vineyard in the world. Imagine, like, this is crazy.
Very impressive.
So we know that you can have wine at Schloss Johannesburg, but our most important question, can you have coffee and cake there?
It doesn't look like they have coffee, but if you visit their restaurant, they do have cake on their dessert menu, as well as some really great looking menu items. And they also have a cafe. Again, no coffee and cake, but plenty of other things to choose from. And of course, the wine.
Wine is more like, maybe we should think about renaming our podcast.
Coffee, cakes, castles, wine.
Yeah, no. We're staying with coffee, cakes, and castles, but
yes,
we have an addition with wine this time.
Yes, and as always, if you would like a particular castle covered, just drop it into the comments. Otherwise, Lara and I will choose from our extensive list.
Thank you so much for listening, guys. It was so fun being back. We had a little break over summer, so let's get back into it and get to know some more palaces.
Yes, very excited. Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.